Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Sorry, this is my first meeting of the day. It looks like my lighting's a little off.
I was okay. Don't worry. I was just fixing mine as well. So, yeah,
Well, then you know.
I do. Yes, everything got moved around since I was in here last, and I was like, okay, why am I getting glare? So, it's been a while. How are you?
Yeah, doing okay. Just trying to make it through the holiday season relatively unscathed. How about you and yours?
Yes, that does sound about right. Yes, this is um well, tomorrow's my last day that I'm working. So when you popped in my calendar, I was like, oh, that's such a fun way to like end my end my year.
Yeah, that's exciting. What is your
Right.
job?
Well, this is part of my job. And I the other part is speaking. So I've started doing a lot of speaking just for, parents and advocating and all the things. And I wrote a book since we last spoke.
Amazing.
I know.
Amazing.
I know. So, yeah, good things. Good things.
Super fun. And also, it's not unlike having a baby because then it goes into the world and you're like, I don't know. I hope people are nice.
I, that is exactly. I will tell you'll appreciate this because it hasn't gone out yet. It publishes in June of next year, and so I just finished the whole like editing process and had a sensitivity editor.
Yeah.
And I thought, here's I'm writing a book that's for parents and allies, and I mean, this is kind of what I do, like, is be sensitive.
Yeah.
And the things that this person were like drilled me on, I was like, holy cow. I mean, like really fine details of like stuff that I don't know that anybody would pick up. But I was like, okay, that's why we have you.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and you get to decide, right? You get to
Right.
decide, is this a fight I want to pick or no?
Wow.
And in some cases, you're like, you know, this turn of phrase or analogy or whatever really like it has an impact that the alternatives don't. And if that means that 0.01% of people who read this book might be turned off by it, like I'm willing to make that compromise. You know what I mean? As long as you're making
Yes.
it the choice intentionally. Like I wanted to not capitalize the word white when describing white people, but capitalize the word black when describing black people in my book. Um, and like there was some pushback around that. And I was like, nope, this is the
Yeah.
choice I'm making. And there are
Right.
there's like grammatical reasons and then there's like political reasons for doing that, but like it
Sure.
was a choice that I made. And the editor was like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, yes, I
Right.
have thought about this. This is intentional. It is a choice that I am making. I'm not doing it. It wasn't a typo. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right. I think
Oh,
I love that because that is definitely, I think, my biggest lesson coming out of this whole thing was learning what to fight for and then what I was willing to let go of. Like what I was just like, no, this has to be in this book. Like, and here are my 10 reasons or even one reason. It doesn't matter. I'm the author. There are
yeah.
times where I'm like, I am writing the book. Like, you are the
Yep.
editor. Just
Yeah.
stop rewriting my stuff. And yes, but that I think, to your point, and just kind of like, there's a little bit of growing up in all of that and being like, okay,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and this is why it's important. So,
I have one friend who's very famous in the literary world, the like fancy, snooty literary world. And
ooh,
that's what he always said that's what was his only advice to me, which was just really know your power as the author and figure out what are the things that you are not willing to bend on, whether it's the cover image or the title or, certain aspects of the story that you really want to be in there, like fight for those things.
right.
That was helpful.
So helpful. Well, it's great advice to get before you're in the middle of the process, right? And you're kind of figuring it out and it gets very it can get a little messy. I know I did a lot of like, okay, I've got to get up and go for a walk and then I'll be back. Right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Yep.
mhm.
Well, happy to
So
chat with you today.
I know. So tell me, I remember I have to apologize because I remembered you emailing me and then when you popped in, I was like, okay, I'm not remembering. I have a sister who is in hospice, and I just lost my dog a couple weeks ago. So I am literally like a little bit off my A game. I'm just going to tell you that up front.
That's fine.
But I
So my idea for this interview was like, what do you do when it really is just a phase?
okay.
And we spend so much time thinking about supporting our queer and trans youth with this, like, it's not just a phase thing, but like, what if it is? Like, what if a trans or non-binary identity is a transitory thing in a kid's life and they actually do outgrow it? And how can we kind of lean into that, like, yes, it might be just a phase and that's okay, and not get so stuck in telling all the other adults in a kid's life, because this is what happened with my middle kid. Like, my
Okay.
middle kid came out as trans at, I think, 10 or 11, and then non-binary, and then like 3 weeks ago was like, yeah, I'm not. And so how do you kind of like hold lightly to that as a parent and not make your whole identity around being the parent of a trans kid and not
Right.
have your kid's story be used as a weapon against trans kids?
Right. Well, I think that I knew there was a reason. I was like, okay, this is exactly it. Like, how do we talk about this? Because people are very, and it's the way, humans are. We want things to be one way or another. Like, we like the
Mhm.
boxes. We like to check the boxes, right?
Yes.
So how do we um I love this talking about this in the sense of how do we do this without it being like, aha, I gotcha. You were wrong, right? Like,
Exactly.
all of you advocates and allies and parents and actual human beings are wrong, right?
Yeah.
So good. Okay, I love this. I am going to literally just like tee this up for you. I mean, I will have pop in questions here and there. The way I kind of do things now are a little bit different because I do intro and outro after in post production.
Sure.
So we're going to jump right into chatting and just welcoming you back and all the things and then we'll just go from there. And I am trying somewhat successfully to keep my interviews to between 30 and 40 minutes because that
Sure.
seems to be a good like attention span time. So if all of a sudden I'm wrapping up, you're like, oh, but just
No
tell me,
problem.
like, there's one more thing. Like, if we don't get all the things out, like, you tell me, okay? Um, and I'm just so excited you're here. So thank you so much for reaching back out to me.
Happy to be here. And just in case I forget later, feel free to send me your manuscript if you need a blurb or something like that. I'm happy to look at it. And then if I feel so moved, then I would love to
Thank
write a little
you.
something for you. I try to make
Oh,
it off, I try to make it really authentic. So I can't always promise that I have
sure.
something unique to say about it that someone else might not. But
Right.
I can at least extend the invitation if it ends up being useful. Maybe you have a lot of snooty literary friends that are way
I do
fantasy.
not. I do not have any snooty literary friends. I have all fun. Some are literary and some are just not.
Yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
lot of just humans. I'd like to meet some snooty literary people and have them put me in my place. That would be fun. I think I could learn a thing or two. Okay, so we are actually already recording,
Yep.
which I realized I did that and I probably shouldn't have, but
Oh,
that's
I saw
okay.
it.
This is why we have editors. Um, and so we're just going to go ahead and jump in and we will go from there. All right. Um, Tristan, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I'm so excited to have you here. It has been a couple of years, I think, since you were last on talking about your book, which I love and I still do recommend to people. I actually just recommended it. I didn't tell you this when we were talking a few minutes ago. I just recommended it earlier this week. I was in a meeting with somebody and they were asking questions, and I was like, I have the perfect book for you to understand this. So, love, just I'm so, so thrilled. And what you have come to talk about today and to discuss is a topic that I think I know will make everybody kind of sit up and listen, but everyone I want you to sit up and listen and really hear what Tristan has to say and listen to this discussion because this is something really important for all of us, especially parents, allies, and anyone who is actually kind of walking through this right now. So, with that, Tristan, thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, what a delight to be back and for once to not be talking about trans fertility, which I love. I'm obsessed with it. I think about it day and night. And hopefully this will be like, see, I'm not a one-trick pony.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, uh we've been a little bit private about this. I mean, we've been private about everything. Some folks, if you've been following the podcast for a long time, then you heard me, as Heather mentioned a couple of years ago, coming on. I'm a transgender man. I gave birth to a baby 6 years ago. He's in first grade now. And a few years before that, my partner and I had adopted my partner's niece and nephew. And so parenting is a big part of our lives. And, now I'm a transgender parent. Uh, so I'm, sort of always wearing both hats, a member of the community and raising the next generation of human beings.
Mhm.
Um, and a few years ago, our middleest child is how I often refer to Sully,
Love
sat us
that.
down and said, I really feel like even though I have been treated as a girl and was assigned female at birth, like I really do feel like a boy. And I'd like to cut my hair and I'd like to go by a different name. And we went through that experience and I have since left social media. I mentioned it a little bit online, but was I wanted to be really thoughtful about it.
Sure.
And, for me as a transgender person, there's a real trap when you're a
Mhm.
transgender parent, which is people look at you and look at your kids and think, are you going to mess them up somehow?
Mhm.
And I feel like we spend a lot of time either consciously or unconsciously trying to convince people, don't worry, our kids will be quote unquote normal. Don't worry, whatever is wrong with me, I'm not going to pass that on to my kids. And for me, this was like really crystallized in a gross way when our older kids were little and they saw their great grandma for the first time since they'd come to live with us, me and my partner. And she said to us, "Oh, thank God. I see that you've gendered them appropriately."
Oh.
And the little girl child was in a dress and the little boy child was in jeans. And it was super clear that she was under the impression that we were going to quote
Mm.
unquote mess them up. Do you know what I mean?
Right,
And
right,
because that's there either like consciously or unconsciously, it's an additional burden that trans parents have to carry with us. So then it's like, if our kid does come out as trans or somehow gender nonconforming, it's like, oh no, we've somehow failed.
right.
That can kind of be what the world teaches us, which is
Yeah.
really gross. It
Well, it's
somehow is, right?
yeah, it's very gross, and I wonder I do often think about this, and and a number of couples that I know who are same-sex couples who are raising children, and I think, okay, and transgender, I mean, I think you might be I mean, I just love that I know you, but I don't know that I know any other actually, I should say I take that back because I do. But anyway, doesn't matter. I wonder I've wondered that, like, how much is that part of your psyche every single day? And what messages are you receiving from other people, both verbally and non-verbally? And how do we counteract that? What do we do about that?
Right. What do we do about that? And so it is something that have thought a lot about. And so when Sully came to us and said, I feel like I'm a boy. I want to cut my hair. I want to change my name. I was ironically really skeptical internally,
Sure.
which of course it is, again, very ironic because I am a transgender man myself. So how dare I be like, are you really though?
Right.
And Sully had exhibited zero signs of gender incongruity up until that moment. No real desire to dress like in a more masculine or androgynous way, the ways that we sort of code that in our
Sure.
society. No interest in sort of more traditionally like boy toys or clothes, but like I wasn't that way either, like I didn't know I was trans when I was a kid, and so what it was,
Right.
I did have to check myself, I really did.
Sure.
Um,
Sure. Well, and
yeah,
I think did you also wonder, like, because it is part of your conversation, part of just what you're teaching your children just to be so much more open and so much more aware, and that this is something that they were probably like, well, this seems like it fits. And
yeah,
and
and
right?
that's the thing is I was like, well, but the reason I didn't know sooner in my life was because I didn't have the language. I didn't have any, I had nothing.
Right,
Um,
right.
but of course, all that was internal and behind closed door conversations. And of
Yes.
course, with our kid, we were just sort of like, sure, whatever you want. Like you can cut your hair, you can wear whatever clothes you want, you can go by whatever name you want, whatever, we don't care.
Right.
Knowing, of course, that if we said, are you sure, then that's not fair, to put on our kid.
Of
But
course.
also really forcing the issue also wouldn't be fair either. Just like, this is amazing. Let's throw a coming out party. And, that's too much too for for a tween, a pre-tween. Ugh, they don't want that either, So we held really lightly to it. And went through some stages of, super short hair, really masculine clothes, coming out to friends and family, all the things, and having to deal with, I did have someone in my life, a close blood relative who said, you did this to your kid. That your kid feels like there's no way that they could be loved if they weren't trans, because that's who
Mm,
you are. And I have since cut that person out of my life completely.
yeah.
That's a brutally short-sighted, transphobic, and judgmental thing to
And
say. That is not at
cruel.
all rooted in reality. Um,
Right.
so I had to go through a hard learning there. Not everyone, you have to be this cool to ride the ride. You
Right.
have to be this sane to ride the ride in terms of
Yeah.
having a relationship with me and having access to a relationship with my kids. You have to, you have to be there is a litmus test, and that is it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, go ahead.
No, no, no. I was just going to say, I think that's very reasonable, a very reasonable litmus test. I mean, that was beyond cruel as far as, I mean, that's me being sharing my opinion, but not acceptable.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's not acceptable. And all three of our kids know that they have our unflinching, um, unconditional love for now and for always.
Right.
And that absolutely supersedes their gender or gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation,
Right.
anything, political affiliation, religious, beliefs. Like our love for them is, stretches throughout all time and all place.
Right.
Uh, and for someone to, yeah, it was extremely hurtful. I'll say that.
Mhm.
Yeah. But, the reason that I was interested in coming on is to talk about that first piece around like
Yes.
what kinds of double standards do we put on trans people,
Yes.
Um, and then the second thing I wanted to talk about is that our middle child outgrew it, which is like so counterintuitive again, because we're constantly saying it's not a phase, they won't outgrow it. But like, what if they do? And how do we hold that as like, absolutely, when relatives say, well, it's just a phase, they'll outgrow it, instead of being like, no, they won't, how can we be like, yeah, maybe,
Maybe.
yeah.
Right.
And how do we support them through that too? And with
Right.
Sully, it was slow, so it was like, okay, well, I go by both pronouns or all pronouns, and then like I noticed that like, oh, you're growing your hair out and not asking for a haircut again. And then when we go shopping, you're like back to the like girls section instead of the boys section. And you know what I mean? It was like a
Right.
slow thing. And I really tried to not, again, like, you don't want to impose. At this point, we were like at like 11, then 12, then 13. They don't want to talk to you, you know?
And
But
that
I started,
continues. Yeah,
yeah, I
that
know it,
continues.
I know. I know it continues. But I started noticing like Sully would be telling other people, like, oh, I go by both pronouns, or I go by she and they.
Hmm.
And then you'll appreciate this as a parent, Heather. Of course, even though I'm consistently, maybe once every 3 to 6 months, oh, hey, by the way, like, what pronouns are you using? Like, what's like, is they them still feeling good for you? Just like a little bit of a pulse check.
Right, exactly.
Always treated as if that was the most like ridiculous, stupid, inappropriate thing for me to ever ask. Thank you so much, my lovely teenager. And then come to find out she doesn't identify as non-binary anymore in the most obnoxious way possible.
Oh, stop.
Yes, well, my mom sends me a text. Hey, there's this trans non-binary youth event in Canada. It's a week-long free summer camp where they can go, and there's like singing and dancing and karaoke and board games, and like adventure hikes, whatever. And it's close to my mom's house in BC. And it's free, right? So I send the flyer to my child, whom I love. Hey, this is happening near Grammy's house. I would love to, I'm happy to drive you up to Canada, which is like an 8 hour fucking drive. I'll stay at Grammy's while you're there, and then I'll pick you up and we'll come home, right? I think as a parent, I'm doing this, making this lovely offer of a gesture to my child. And she responds, pass.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
It, but nothing else, just pass.
nothing else, pass. And I was like, okay, comma, why, question mark. I'm just
Right,
trying to understand, like, where did I miss the mark here? I
right,
thought
exactly. Do you
that
not
this,
like Canada? Is it you don't like board games? Like,
yes,
let's narrow
exactly,
this down a little bit.
exactly. And then she writes back, no reason, just no thanks. I'm good. And I was like, okay. And
Hmm.
then she writes back a screenshot of the flyer with the trans, non-binary, gender, like gender creative part circled, like
Mm-hmm.
edited,
Oh,
and said,
sure.
also, I'm none of these things.
Oh,
And I'm
like
like, wait,
like an aside, like as a
yes,
PS.
yes. Number one, this doesn't sound fun, and how dare you suggest it? Number two, by the way, I'm not trans.
BTW, just wanted to
Again,
let you know.
as
Yeah.
if I am a total moron.
Well,
And how
clearly you
dare
are. I mean, how did you not know that? I just the long list of things that we don't know that we're supposed to just like know.
Yes, it was as if I had asked her, what does Riz mean?
I actually asked that question because I couldn't like figure out where all the other letters were, which ones they were supposed to be. But then when it was explained to me, I mean, duh,
Obviously,
how
it's charisma.
charisma. It's in
Yeah,
the middle of the stupid word. I mean,
yeah,
come
yeah,
on.
yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Well, number one, I just want like anyone who's listening to think to understand that like even if you were queer or trans, if you're not, your kid is still going to talk to you like you're an idiot.
Yes,
You
100.
are no closer to them in terms of them confiding in you or like actually bringing you into their thought process. They're still going to treat you as if you didn't know anything and were supposed to be psychic. So just so folks know, like that comes with the territory no matter what.
Yeah,
Um, and I don't know, I just wanted to make sure that people feel like it's okay if it is a phase.
right,
And Sully's gender identity would not have met the criteria for transition.
right,
Like, that's the other thing I really want to make sure that people are armed with those tools. Well, I hear about these kids where they think it one day and they don't the next. That's right, totally. So instead of doubling down on the like, that's not real or that doesn't happen, if you think about in those hard conversations, loosening up and leaning in, that's right. Some kids do identify as trans or non-binary for a very short period of time. Those kids do not meet the criteria for puberty blockers or transition. Their
Right.
gender identity is not insistent, consistent, persistent. And so
Exactly.
those the like guidelines are in place to make sure that those kids are allowed to explore their gender and are protected from doing anything that might have a negative permanent impact on their development or growth if 6 months later they're like, JK,
Right.
I'm not any of those things with that level of attitude that my kid has.
Circle X. I mean, kind of bravo, I have to say. I'm liking the sass only because I have 4 of those. And I do like that. So a couple of things that I think are so fabulous that you are bringing up, talking about, and oh, this is so good. So first of all, in this, I love that you are talking about this in the sense of fluidity, which I think is a really hard thing for just humans to get their heads around, right? And especially when you think about it at these ages, our kids are changing and growing, and they're one day they like a sport and the next day they don't, right? And they're experimenting, and when they live in a home, and I'm thinking this is what, now tell me, correct me if I'm completely off base here, but this is what I'm kind of hearing and thinking. When they live in a home that is so loving and they know they are loved unconditionally, they know that they can show up exactly as who they are that day. And it gives them the space to be able to say, this kind of feels like maybe who I am, and try it on. And then 6 months down the road, they've developed more, they've changed more, they've experienced more life. They may still be in that place. Awesome. They may not be. Also awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really hard for us to do, because I think that, as especially like, older, 35 plus, maybe, I don't even know. Let's not put an age on it. People who are a tad bit older, like to put things in boxes. Like, we really like to be like, okay, boy or girl, right? Gay or straight. Like, there's like, black or white, like literally, like there are just for everything. And I think that this is one of the most beautiful things that we can do, is just wipe all of those boxes away and not panic when there isn't one.
And just let them figure it out and get out of their way,
Yes.
not try to get too, and then we get to model for grandparents, right? Or we can model for whomever else that like, yeah, you're totally right. It could be a phase. And
Right.
for now, it doesn't hurt us or our kid to call them whatever name, whatever pronoun they want us to call them. That's it.
Right. And it doesn't take away from the fact that, um, those who it's not a phase for, it doesn't say, well, they weren't created that way. Right. Because I think I'm just thinking in my head, like all of like the counter arguments here, that we hear. And I think that's one where, there's a lot of ahas, like gotchas and in this conversation. And I'd like to debunk as many as we can. Um, I want to circle back to kind of the beginning where you were talking about raising your kids, and the things that do tend to come at that came at you while you were raising when they were younger, and questions that people just ask. And that's something that I really think is so important to debunk as well, that um the identity and orientation of the parent, what matters most. I mean, what I heard you say, and I happen to agree with you 1,000%, is, are these kids unconditionally loved?
Yeah,
But I'd
and
love to hear more of your thought on that.
I mean, I'll say that Leo, who's our 6-year-old, like he has so much more freedom to explore his interests and gender expression than our older kids did. Because by the time we get to the third kid and not being in the middle of a guardianship,
Sure.
and not having to worry that, like, oh, a picture on Facebook of a kid not appropriately gendered, quote unquote, could
Mm,
be used in court to show that we aren't good parents and that we are going to somehow indoctrinate them into our way of thinking that anyone can express their gender however they want, God forbid.
right.
I'm
Right.
sure our older kids look at Leo and they're like, what the hell? You let him wear whatever he wants, And we're like, yeah, we do. The circumstances are very different. And Leo will tell you he's 6. And so he has a very strong gender identity as boy. He also has a very strong gender expression, which is feminine. He's like very much, he will say, like, I'm a boy who likes girl things. Like he loves foofy dresses. He wants to wear them to school. And we let him because we're tired. We're 10 years older than we were when our kids were starting to want to express themselves differently.
Yeah.
Um, and B, the stakes are just way, 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 way lower. We're not
Mhm.
in the middle of having our like parenthood challenged legally.
Yeah.
We don't have to prove ourselves to anyone with him. And it's very weird because I sometimes find myself like in public spaces and he's got short hair now because he wants to have short hair and he's wearing a dress. And there's that part of me that wants to say, but don't worry, like I didn't make him this way. Like we've
Right.
just gotten out of his way.
Right.
But the truth is, we did make him this way. Only in that we gave him the freedom to explore and
Mm.
express himself. And what we know is that no grown up human ever goes to their parents and says, how dare you have let me figure out my own path? Like grown ups don't go to their parents and say, I
No.
wish you hadn't given me the freedom to figure out who I was at a young age. Like it just doesn't happen.
No,
He'll
that
never
is
come to us
not
and say, well, why did you put me in a dress? Because we'll say, you put yourself in those.
right. Exactly.
The
Exactly.
opposite is usually what happens. I really wish that you had let me express myself more when I was
Right.
young, and we will not have that regret. We go to the
No.
store, he has his budget of $24. He can pick out whatever outfit he wants in Target. And if it's a dress, fine. And if it's a fireman's costume, fine. Like whatever, whatever. Um, and we want him to be free from the pressures that we feel ourselves are under in terms of having to prove ourselves and demonstrate heteronormativity through our children.
Right. And what a beautiful, beautiful thing that you're doing because I really admire and respect how you both are kind of coming up against, you're recognizing these things within you that are uncomfortable or that you're seeing out in the world that are uncomfortable. And you're saying, okay, I see you and I'm leaning in. We're doing this. And I'm going to that is what great modeling. I mean, not only for your kids, but for every single person listening, every
And
single person who comes into contact with you.
and we have extraordinary privilege because our family is legally protected, right? Our older kids, there's an adoption's forever. Leo is genetically both of our children. No one can come for him. We
Right.
live in Oregon, where it's not against the law to let our kids cut their hair or grow their hair out or wear dresses, where the kids can go to school and they're not going to be sent home,
Hmm.
because they're not quote unquote appropriately gendered. That's a lot of
Oh,
privilege. And we've got the grandparents whose love and support of our family is not conditional upon our kids being, again, like quote unquote appropriately gendered. There's a
right.
lot of privilege built into that. And we really understand that as well.
Yeah.
Not
Well,
everyone has those options.
no, they don't. And um but it's so good. I mean, I think the more that, you know, you peop you and people like you speak up and speak out and share, that's how these things change, right? And that privilege does extend to people in more and more places. I mean, that's the hope, that's the fight. And again, like so I was circling back to, these are human beings. Like we're not talking about like these are human beings.
Yeah. I mean, I heard a great interview recently with Marlon Wayans, who I guess is a trans kid, which I just found out about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, I didn't
Um,
know that.
and he said, of course, like when you have kids, you like want them to be successful. You want them to have a life of meaning. You want them to be happy. But for him, as the parent of a trans youth, what he found is actually a greater wish for his children is that he wishes them to be free.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Ah, yeah,
Yeah.
right?
And I think that's really what I'm thinking about is
Mm.
whether it's Leo being able to wear a dress if he wants, or Sully being able to change her name and change her pronouns and then change it back. Like to
Right.
me, that's liberation. That's what I want for my kids is that they can be free to figure that out without me putting my rigid ideas and expectations and internalized transphobia and external pressures onto them,
Right.
that they get to figure that out for themselves. Um, yeah, so I
Yeah.
thought that was really powerful and it
Oh,
it
that
it hit
is.
me.
Oh my goodness. I mean, truly so beautiful. Wow. Um, yes, and it's possible. I mean, there's a lot that needs to be that we all need to unlearn.
A
And
lot.
I
And he
think,
talks about privilege as well. He's basically
right,
said, I'm rich enough.
right,
Like, I don't care what the right has to say. I don't care what, anti-trans people have to say. I'm rich enough. Cancel me. Go ahead. Try.
right, exactly. Well, and that's it. And like again, I think recognizing the privilege is so important in that equation because it's saying, yeah, I get why I'm able to do this. And
Yeah,
I'm going to keep doing it so that people who perhaps aren't in, my position of privilege are then able to have what I have,
exactly.
right? Um, so that's, and that happens in all kinds of, in all ways, right? So I do appreciate that so much. And I think too, I'd love to just talk a little bit more because this was when you reached out to me, this is what kind of struck me was this discussion of fluidity, um, because this is something that comes up a lot when I work with parents and conversations of just not understanding it. And I've kind of run out of ways to explain it. So I'm wondering if you could really give like your thoughts and your take on it and how we can best embrace it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any magical way of explaining it. Sometimes what comes up for me is I feel like if we had tried to discourage Sully from changing her name and cutting her hair and going by different pronouns, I feel like that would have made things worse. I feel like the second you tell a kid, no, you cannot be that, that becomes their obsession.
Mhm.
And then would Sully have been doing things in secret? Would she have become so convinced that she actually was trans just because there was no place to put that desire to explore things? There's no place to put it and let it out and let it kind of run its course that wouldn't have curdled? And
Right.
so sometimes I'm just like, look, lesser of two evils, just let them do it and figure it out.
Right.
Because if you don't, who knows what's going to happen?
Wow.
I mean, it's so funny. It's the worst analogy and it's imperfect at best. But when I was a kid, I was really interested in theater and performing. And my mom used to say that to me as like, okay, I'm going to let you do acting. Hopefully you get it out of your system. right? Maybe you're just letting your kid get it out of their system, and maybe for the short term, that's how you can think of it. But we know the second we tell a kid, no, you can't learn how to skateboard, that becomes the thing that they're obsessed with.
Right.
Just let them learn how to skateboard. They're going to get hurt, realize it's not actually all that fun,
Right.
and then stop doing it. Or maybe they become a pro skateboarder. Great. You know what I mean? Like, just let them figure it out. And to me, the stakes, they feel high. They're actually not that high. There's just nothing to suggest that your kid is going to be permanently injured by letting them cut their hair or grow their hair out or wear a bow to school, or like, just like, at worst, the kids are going to make fun of them and they will learn about adapting, about code switching. And I do that with
Mhm.
Leo. He's only 6. And I say, sweetheart, I'm so excited for you to wear a dress to school today. Remember that not everyone thinks that boys should wear dresses, and you get to choose. If you wear
Right.
a dress, some kids might say, well, are you a boy or a girl? And you'll have to answer that question. Some kids might say boys aren't supposed to do that. And you'll have to figure that out. Like, how do you want to have that conversation? Or you can choose not to wear a dress and you don't have any of those conversations at all. You choose. He's
Right.
6 and he can totally handle that. He's like, I don't
Right.
care what they say. Okay. Or he'll say, I don't feel like having those conversations today. I'll just wear the pants. All right.
Right.
Like, what harm has befallen him? None.
Right.
He's fine.
Exactly. Well, and I mean, not only no harm, he's learned really valuable life skills, right? I mean, I think learning that we have choices, that it alone is a huge thing, because I think a lot of young people don't realize that they have choices. A lot of adults don't realize that they have choices, right? And so I think that's such a gift to say, here are your choice. You have choices and you have the freedom to make these choices. And here are some of the outcomes you may encounter when you make each of these choices.
Yeah. And you get to choose. And
You get to
sometimes you're going to
choose.
say, I want to take off. Like, I have a friend who lives in a much more conservative area than we do. And our kids are friends. That's part of how we know each other. And her son loves to wear nail polish like his mom on the weekends. And then on Sunday night, he takes it off before he goes to school on Monday because he doesn't want the kids teasing him. Okay, that's his
All
choice.
right.
But she lets him choose. It's not, well, don't let them tell you what to do. No, and it's not, you have to take it off so you don't get teased. No, you give
Right.
them the information, you empower them to make a decision, and they live with the decision that they made.
Exactly.
And then they can make
I,
a different decision tomorrow.
correct. Correct. But holy cow, is that such a powerful, again, modeling of choices and decision making and critical thinking skills. I mean, all of these things that we want our kids to have, um, all while, also demonstrating that we love you for who you are. Like,
Yeah, you're always you.
you're always you.
What's most
Right.
important is you show up authentically as yourself. Um,
Correct.
and that can have lots of different settings.
Correct. Correct. So I just want to say for everyone out there, because I know that I can actually include myself in this as well. Um, for those who have felt like they needed to hang on to the my child has come out as fill in the blank, and I can't let that go. That's what I'm holding on to. That's what I'm learning about. That's what I'm defending. That's where I am. I get that. And I think this is such a powerful, powerful conversation to help support us, and support so many through, that's just learning. This is just another level of education, of empowerment, right?
Yeah.
So thank you. That is incredibly valuable, as well as how to take this out into the world, right? Like how to handle, because I think one of the bigger fears, and I speak, uh, you know, at, for myself, but I know a lot of other people feel this way or have felt this way, is the what do you do when people come at you, right? Like, what do you say?
Yeah.
So thank you. I mean, this is so incredibly, incredibly just helpful and enlightening. And I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you sharing and giving everyone permission, right? All of us, everyone permission to say, okay, yes, this is okay. We don't have to be so uptight about this. We don't have to be so afraid of what if this is all wrong, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When someone comes at you, the more you can agree with them, the sort of less rigid they become. If someone's like, well, what if it's a phase? Yeah, it might be.
Right.
Well, what if he gets bullied at school? Yeah, he might get bullied at school for sure. That is something I'm really worried about too.
Hmm.
As much as you can position yourself not as, we're, pro and anti, but more we both really love and care for this kid and want the best for them. Let's talk about how we can do that. I think it's
Right.
going to turn out a little better. Yeah, thanks for
Right.
having me on.
Of course. I am so, so glad that you were here today and that you reached out. This is just fantastic. And I just wish you and your family a beautiful holiday.
Thank you. You as well.